Hi, and welcome to today's educational webinar presentation, Arming Your Manufacturing Workforce with Flexible Tech Tools. I'm Anna Wells with Manufacturing Business Technology, and I will be your moderator for today's event. So manufacturers are increasingly demanding flexibility from their enterprise business management systems, whether it be for cutting costs, increasing adoption, or easing the strain on scarce IT resources. Today we'll discuss best practices for manufacturers wrestling with some tough choices, including when to choose cloud or hybrid platforms over on-premise, and how this impacts specific business functions, and how to assess the latest tools and tips for manufacturers looking to upgrade a legacy system. We'll also look at the role of mobility and intelligence in manufacturing ERP and how it can improve usage and effectiveness amongst both digital immigrants and digital natives. Joining us today is Mike DiPasquale, Group Enterprise Systems Manager for Avon Rubber, an industrial manufacturing company with more than 20 business units and personnel across the globe. Mike will discuss how today's technology helped Avon Rubber bring together disparate data and share it across the enterprise quickly and easily. Following Mike, we'll hear from Jeff Mills, Director of Product Marketing for Sage. Sage provides small and medium-sized organizations and mid-market companies with a range of easy-to-use, secure, and efficient business management software and services, from accounting, HR, and payroll to payments, enterprise resource planning, and customer relationship management. Jeff is here to provide some criteria driving new ERP considerations, including things like simplicity, speed, flexibility, and functionality. Before we kick off, I'd like to just mention a few quick housekeeping items for the presentation. As we proceed today, if you should have any questions for our panel, you may enter them into the questions and answers box at any time. We will have a Q&A session later in the presentation where we will answer as many questions as possible. If you would like to review this presentation afterwards or refer a colleague to view the broadcast, be aware that it will be available for on-demand viewing. And we'll send a thank you email actually either today or tomorrow, including an on-demand link to this. And then we're also going to be referencing a report conducted by Sage in the presentation that will be sent in that thank you email as well. So look for that. So before we hear from our panel, I just thought it would be valuable to take a look at some of the ways manufacturers are currently utilizing enterprise tools and technologies and really how that's changing. MBT has done a lot of research in the area of enterprise systems, especially as it relates to flexible deployment options. So let's start at the beginning and look at how our readership of manufacturing executives, operations management, and IT professionals are utilizing ERP. In MBT's 2014 report, The State of Manufacturing ERP Systems, just over 2/3 of our survey respondents say they have an ERP system in place. What's interesting to note is that our base of respondents included around 30% who represent companies of 50 employees or fewer, and another 11% with 50 to 100 employees, meaning that even amongst these traditional SMBs, we're seeing adoption of ERP at this stage of the game. This is a fairly significant shift from the early 2000s when ERP was considered a bit more strategic. Now it's kind of considered, I would say, to be a must-have. So of the readers surveyed, almost 63% have a system that is 4 years old or older, with just over 34% of overall respondents indicating a system that is 7 or more years old. This comes into play when we talk about technology solutions as they exist today and how they interact with legacy systems. Finally, when it comes to hosting methods, our survey respondents also use a variety of methods, with the majority still in an on-premise setting. So we did a survey about 6 months after the ERP report deployed, and this time we focused specifically on cloud technology. What was most interesting to me was the way the respondents talked about their usage of cloud. We asked if they were using it for business purposes, not specifically just their enterprise hosting method, but just business purposes in general, and many more said yes. In fact, 40% were either currently using or in the process of implementing some type of cloud-hosted application. Also, 19% told us they'd been utilizing cloud solutions for 1 year or less, which actually speaks to the pace at which this technology is being implemented within manufacturing businesses. It was clear that that data had changed quite a bit in the 6 months since we had sent out the previous survey. So when it comes to challenges, those who don't use the cloud cite security concerns as their biggest obstacle, although experts say that this is largely a myth. Additionally, awareness issues seem to hinder this crowd, as a third of those utilizing on-premise resources say they don't understand the benefit of the cloud. And yet for those who are actively working on cloud platforms, the benefits seem to be quite obvious. Sage has also done some interesting research as it relates to cloud, and in their recent report titled Enterprise Business Management Solutions in the 21st Century Key Buying Considerations, Sage says that manufacturers must decide whether it makes sense to purchase an on-premise versus a cloud-based version, but one isn't inherently better than the other. It just comes down to an organization's requirements. That said, for a cloud-based solution, manufacturers don't need to purchase, maintain, and upgrade expensive in-house equipment or skilled IT staff to ensure that the system is always available and always running properly. I bring up this specific point because it's basically in lockstep with what our readers told us lay at the heart of their reason for implementing cloud solutions. Our readers told us that their cloud usage was mainly motivated by economic factors, as well as things like agility and better supply chain collaboration. So ultimately, legacy systems can get the job done, but they leave a little to be desired. According to the Sage report on buying considerations for enterprise solutions, older ERP systems, those 7 years old or older, often don't work well with newer technologies and trends such as mobility, the cloud, or the growing array of sensors and other electronic monitoring solutions that are increasingly becoming part of the manufacturing environment. Additionally, says the Sage report, while legacy ERP systems may be loosely integrated with other critical systems, the integrations usually aren't seamless enough to provide full visibility across the enterprise. And if the systems aren't integrated properly or aren't connected at all, the data can't provide real-time updates from one system into another. With better data accessibility, usability, quality, and intelligence, manufacturers can more effectively analyze performance and identify opportunities to enhance customer relationships and operational efficiency. So, of course, the ultimate goal is to run a better, smarter business, and folks on our panel today are here to talk about some of the ways new technology solutions can make this a reality. So without further ado, I'd like to pass the mic to Mike DiPasquale to give us his perspective on some of the tools that provided the best business results for Avon Rubber. Mike?
Good afternoon. How's everybody? Okay, just a little introduction. My name is Mike DiPasquale. I am the Group Systems, Enterprise Systems Manager for Avon Rubber. Avon Rubber is a UK-based company. We're publicly traded. We own 23 other companies, and our two main lines of business are defense and protection and dairy. Now, those are two very, very different types of businesses. So whenever we put in any type of technology, we need to make sure that it's very flexible and very easy to use so that it can cross over some very different types of businesses. As I said, we have 23 companies. We have 7 manufacturing plants that are located in 4 countries, the U.S., UK, the Czech Republic, and Italy. In the U.S., we have 4 plants. So we have them on the East Coast, the West Coast, and in the South. We have both process and discrete manufacturing. On the processing side, we take raw materials and bits of rubber, and we formulate it with chemicals to get it to change its properties and make it easier or more pliable to work with. On the discrete side, we take components that we've produced in all of our other businesses and combine them to come up with a finished good or a final product that we sell to our end consumer. As I mentioned, we have very diverse and unique product lines. As you can see from this picture, we make parts for hovercrafts. We make masks that are used by the military, gas masks and aircraft masks. We make what are called CBRNs, which are the supplied air that goes on the back of firefighters. So everything from the tanks to the electronics to the mask itself we make. And then for the dairy business, we make anything that really has to do with milking cows or goats. So the liners, the hoses, the shells, the weight. So we can't just pick up a product, an ERP system off the shelf and try and implement it, because if we did that, then it would work in the dairy business, but it wouldn't work in the protection or vice versa. So we need to find a solution that would work across all of our different businesses. So to start with, because we have all of these different people throughout the world manufacturing goods for us, we have different skill sets, and we can't always rely upon what's built natively inside the ERP system. So what we had to do is make sure we implemented technology to make sure that their jobs could be done in a very efficient and a very error-free environment. One of the things that we really had to look out for was, because we're producing thousands upon thousands of goods, it's not just a couple hundred a month by any stretch of the matter, because we're producing tens of thousands of products, and each one is made to very stringent either military specifications if it's a military product, or FDA. If we're producing goods for the dairy industry, it has to produce the food. It has to be passed by all the Food and Drug Administration specifications. So all of our stuff is so very tightly controlled that we can't afford to have variances in the product. So to get around and to work with those limitations, we've implemented a couple different things. The first thing is we implemented iPads in the production floor. So rather than trying to put out all these older big touch screens that you see that can be very costly, we went with iPads, which can be bought for a couple $100s, and we developed our own production entry screens using .NET. So they're simply just web pages, but they link into our ERP system using web services so that it's real-time data and it's much easier. So instead of going to the ERP system and having somebody on the floor put in, maybe 15 or 20 different fields, they can go in and simply touch the screen, touch the iPad, and do lookups and do production entry in a matter of touches, as opposed to as difficult as it was before. So that provided quite a bit of streamlining for us. The other thing we've done is made sure we implemented scanners. Now, scanners is probably the most commonly used technology that you're going to see in a warehouse, so that really isn't anything life-changing for us, but it's tremendous. It really helps us move the product from point A to point B without missing things. It also helps us in our picking process and our shipping process. So that's something that we did from day one, and it's really helped us streamline some of our processes. Another type of technology, which is probably dependent on your type of business, is robotics. Rather than trying to get a person to put a very small part into another part, and to do that with such tight tolerances, we implemented robotics in a number of our plants. So what we do is we just monitor their status, and we work with PLC programmers, and we work with the robotics companies to produce these items, which help us manufacture very efficiently and very precisely. And then finally, on the left-hand side, you'll see, which might be a little tough to see, is we implemented a LED lighting system. And what's really unique about this, what's really kind of interesting, is we have, and we'll use a gas mask as an example, there's certain steps that you need to take to put this in order. So you might need to put A, B, C, D, E, F, G together in that order. So what happens is we have a bin with each one of those parts that represent each one of those, and then there are LED lights. You can see the white bars that are on the edge there. When a person reaches their hand in, it knows that it reached it in the proper order. So it'll light up and tell you that you need to reach in there and grab this part. And if you reach into the wrong bin, it lights up red, saying that you're taking it out of order. So it's a directed method of trying to produce parts and or produce a finished good, so that you're not skipping a step, you're not forgetting to put a component on. It's something that it's helped us out quite a bit with our quality. So those are some basic examples of things we've put onto the floor itself. There's a number of different things we've also done, but these are some of the major ones we've done. If I go down to the next slide, if I can get there. The other part of it is the business intelligence. And the business intelligence is just as important as the technology we have on the floor. Because if we're producing things and we're not knowing if we're hitting our marks or if we're using too much scrap or whatever, we need to know that as soon as we can. So we've implemented a couple different things for business intelligence. One is a tool called Sage Enterprise Intelligence. It's something that taps into the database and allows us to look at data cubes and models in real time. So the first one you look at the top is a series of gauges. At any given point throughout the day, we could very easily look at our dashboard and see whether or not we have too much of one particular product, not enough of another, and if we're just bordering on the caution level. And this updates real time, and we know right at an easy glance whether or not we're producing at the rate that we need to produce. And one of the things we've done with this tool is we are able to take these dashboards and export them out to HTML. By doing that, we're able to take smart TVs and take the HTML file and read them by the smart TVs. So throughout our plants, we will have these 70-inch TVs that do nothing more than show these dashboards and refresh themselves every 5 minutes. So at any point as you're walking through our floor, you can see what the different areas are doing, and you can see whether or not they're producing what they need to produce. So if the scrap level rate is a little bit high for the day, people can look in and say, well, maybe the mixture on that rubber wasn't quite right. Or if it's a little bit too low, we can say, well, this is the way we want to go. And we can constantly adjust our production just based on visual cues that we have throughout the floor. A couple of those other things you see down at the bottom. On the left-hand side is something called a worksheet. It's basically just a raw data extract from the system. So our people can take that data and they can manipulate it, massage it to whatever they need. So instead of getting very static crystal reports, which is what a lot of systems have, instead of getting a printout that has to look a certain way, we give them access to this tool, which then allows them to take the data and regroup it, resort it. They can take off fields that they don't need. They can add fields that they do need. And it really empowers our manufacturing managers to get the information that they need without having to wait a day or 2 or 3 for the IT department to try and change reports and give them what they need. And then finally on the right is just a efficiency run rate. So you can see at any given point when certain things are working and certain things aren't working. So it's important to us that we visually give these cues to our managers so that they're not having to go into the system and constantly try and extract it out. These are very proactive type of reports. These are very proactive type dashboards that give the information to people without them having to go and search for it and make their lives a little bit more difficult. Okay, so with that, I will pass it along to Jeff.
Thanks, Mike. I really appreciate that. I think that's a really good overview on how technology can be utilized both on the floor and to better provide intelligence to the workforce. I really appreciate it. I wanted to cover a little bit on technology, how technology is shifting, the common question we get between cloud and on-premise, and when one versus the other may be right for your business. Really the cloud story kind of starts with this data here, and that's what's your least favorite aspect of your ERP software. And there's some common trends here. The implementation and maintenance cost is usually the highest. Lack of flexibility, difficult user experience rank as the 3 least favorite aspects of the software. Then we also see factors like scalability to support growth within the organization, older systems lacking support for mobile, as Anna mentioned earlier, and then poor service from the vendor as the 6th one. So that kind of frames the cloud versus on-premise discussion, and that really does it through what do you want to consider when selecting your solution. Some organizations that we talk to really focus on reporting, especially if it's a finance-led discovery process. Some are really focused on the operations management, and we suggest you kind of want to take a step back and look at these 4 categories and prioritize them. What's most important to you? Simplicity, making the system easy to manage, easy to learn, easy to use. Speed, both in terms of ability to deploy, speed of accessing the data, speed of insight into the data, and then collaboration. Flexibility, is the system adaptable to change? Is it scalable? Is it ready for expansion? And those get really interesting because we talk to a lot of companies that they're distributors, and after a couple of years they decide they want to start manufacturing some products, and if their system can't add a manufacturing component, they're kind of stuck in going through the replacement process again. So you really have to look at not just what you're doing today, but what your potential is going forward. And then scalability is not just users, but expansion can mean, like Mike is doing, looking at working globally, UK company working in the US and other countries. How easy is it for the system to manage that expansion? And then the fourth one is functionality. Of course, you need a solution that's functional, no doubt about it. And that means things like, is it ready for your industry? Is it ready for your business? Is it easy to extend that functionality as your business changes? So maybe today you don't need it, but you need EDI or you need e-commerce, and you need to be able to have customers pay with a credit card or payment terms in e-commerce, and making sure you have a system that can handle all that flexibility. So all those things, once you have those prioritized, the real question comes up, when should you select the cloud? And we kind of have top reasons to choose cloud and then top reasons to deploy on-premise. I think it's really important to note that as technology matures, these will blend more and more, but this is a pretty decent snapshot today. First reason to choose the cloud is speed. Cloud solutions can generally be deployed much more quickly. There's no need to buy infrastructure, set up that infrastructure, and all that. The vendor's doing that for you. Simplicity. Cloud systems tend to have a newer design, so a simpler to use design. And then on the back end, the vendor is doing the upgrading for you, so it's much easier to stay on the latest version with all the latest bells and whistles, so to speak. Cost, of course, is a major consideration for any deployment, and cloud does have lower startup investment, reduced staffing, reduced server needs, reduced customization that leads to easier upgrades in the future. And those savings can be significant, 30 to 50% versus an on-premise operation. And then finally, compliance. And it's funny, compliance shows up in reasons to deploy on-premise and reasons to deploy in cloud. But from a security standpoint, as Anna mentioned earlier, there's a lot of concern about cloud security. But actually, when research is done on which is more secure, cloud or on-premise deployment, cloud is usually more secure. If you have a company like Amazon or Salesforce deploying on their platform, and they really are very focused and have more resources focused on compliance than most companies can do. So those are some considerations on why cloud, some considerations on deploying on-premise. The first one's customization. Most on-premise solutions are still more customizable than a cloud solution. Customization is an interesting aspect. That really means customizing the source product with some of our products. Users can personalize it and make the screens look how they want to, have a specific view for their user type. But customization, meaning really changing the core of the software, is generally easier to do when it's deployed on-premise. Second piece is integration with legacy and desktop systems. A lot of companies don't want to try to shift their entire deployment at once, especially if they have some legacy systems in place. We still talk to a lot of customers that are using some of their pre-year 2000 systems, and they're not necessarily looking to change everything at once. So if you are looking to integrate some of those older systems with an updated ERP solution, on-premise oftentimes works best for that. Choice of add-on solutions. For a lot of cloud solutions, the ecosystem isn't quite as robust as it is for the on-premise solutions. So if you're looking to have a really wide choice of add-ons right now to complement your solution, generally on-premise is going to have more capability. And then compliance. Some local governments require data to be hosted locally. Some government agencies may do the same thing. So if your business requires that you can't have cloud, well, that actually makes the selection pretty easy. And one more touch on the choice of add-on solutions. I think as the cloud solutions mature more and more, I think you'll see that that doesn't become a factor for on-premise, but right now it's still generally more add-on solutions for on-premise than cloud solutions. And with that, I think that covers the why. I mean, I would always say that depends on every company, of course. You always want to talk to the solution provider that you're working with to determine what is really right for you. But those are some high-level ideas. A little bit more detail on those add-on solutions, what you might want to look for in your business. we kind of see you see two things here. You kind of have your core business managed applications and technology. That includes your financials, purchasing, inventory, manufacturing, customer service, and sales management. And then you have your complementary solutions on the right. So that would be enhanced sales management like CRM, warehouse management systems, HR systems, payroll, project job costing, e-commerce, BI, as Mike mentioned, adding more BI functionality. So those are kind of some of the common add-ons we see. When looking at kind of the first pieces of the how to select, I'm going to take a step back here. When it comes to simplicity, ease of use, speed to market, we have a few things we always recommend people look at. Does the solution include a role-based workspace, meaning that does an accounts payable employee see something different than a sales employee? If they're looking at the same screen, the functionality is going to be a little bit slower for them. Reporting and business analytics, the finance team, of course, always wants really good reporting, but as Mike showed, the business analytics throughout the workforce, both plant floor, back office, really important to the organization. So you want to make sure you have a solution that addresses both of those needs and doesn't focus on one or the other. Workflow automation and alerts. We have an interesting stat. I didn't include it here. I'll just read it. But the average small, medium-sized business manager takes 11 and a half days to be informed of anomalies in the business. Having a system that detects and alerts you to those anomalies in minutes rather than days certainly makes the business easier to do business with and reduces a lot of unnecessary cost and wasted material and wasted time. Then, of course, collaboration is a big driver of success now, so you want to make sure your system has document management and collaboration tools. Then I wanted to touch on technology a little bit, and I kind of touched on the cloud versus partner-hosted or on-premise solutions. But other things to know from a technology standpoint that you want to look at is, does the solution use a common data point? Will your manufacturing solution and your financials have common data source so that customer service reps can see both sides of the equation? Does it include dev tools and web services so you can get the most out of the solution both internally or through partners? And how do you access the system? We suggest using a tool that gives you access through a browser, provides a lot more access both through tablets and smartphones, but also means users can use Apple computers or laptops or desktops as long as they have a browser, which everything pretty much does. They have access to the system regardless of what type of system they're using. It makes the organization much more functional and flexible. And that's really what I wanted to touch on today. I hope that answered some of the when and why cloud and some criteria driving new ERP considerations. So with that, Anna, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much to both Mike and Jeff for their input here on this discussion. I will say to the audience, please continue to post your questions. We will get to as many as we can at the end of the presentation. But before we do, I have some questions for the panelists that I'd love to hear some input on, especially because we have so much data relating to this, just to hear some sort of from the ground input on some of this that's coming through from our readership and from Sage's analysis as well. But Jeff, let's start with the Sage report. One of the points brought up in the report on key buying considerations that I found to be quite interesting had to do with how many manufacturers deal with older ERP systems, which often don't work well with newer technologies and trends, such as mobility in the cloud, as we discussed. The report indicates, and we've seen this in our research as well, that these inefficiencies can cause manufacturers to create expensive manual workarounds. So in your opinion, how big of an issue is this, and why are workarounds so dangerous?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I was actually at a trade show last week for food, and this question comes up quite often. Again, like as I mentioned, we still talk to companies that are using their pre-Y2K legacy systems. Certainly those systems were developed before, I think, mobility was even a glimmer in Steve Jobs' mind, so to speak. So those systems can't really, work from a mobile standpoint at all, or if they are, it's usually through a lot of workarounds. And when it comes to the inefficiencies that they cause, quite often what we see is we see a lot of manufacturers using really a poor process and adding people to that process. And as they add customers, as they add more receivables to be delivered or more sales reps, they have to add a lot of back office staff to support their processes that are either in Excel or really are just slow. And so those inefficiencies really usually show up as headcount that make the organization as a little bit larger and less efficient than it could. Figuring out how big that is, as you mentioned, it's in the 30% range in terms of companies that see those kind of situations. But what it's doing to the business is it's not only just increasing costs, but reducing the ability to scale and change to different business conditions. I think we're at the point now where the workarounds are so dangerous because those businesses aren't able to move and pivot as quickly as their competitors, and eventually those systems are going to really prove to be a business hindrance. So I think at the end of the day, the workarounds are so dangerous because eventually it's going to cause those businesses to really not be competitive, and that's really the biggest danger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to your point, I think it's scary too how many manufacturing businesses maybe don't even realize that they're happening, the workarounds are happening, so that adds a little nuance to that issue as well. So I'm going to quote the SAGE report again because I'd love your input on the statement that says, when systems aren't integrated properly, they produce more effective data that manufacturers can analyze to boost efficiency, improve processes, and increase profits. So let's talk about the role of data for a minute, and perhaps Mike can also weigh in here on what you guys see as the biggest benefits to having access to that BI and that data.
Oh, I think having access to real-time data is invaluable. I don't think there's any substitute for it. As Jeff was saying, in the past, people had to wait days or weeks to get information about how a company was functioning, and I don't quite see how you can operate a global business that way. So today, by having a BI tool and having access to that information, we can make decisions based on things that happened 15 minutes ago. So like I said earlier in the presentation, if a machine all of a sudden acting in a strange way, or it needs calibration or something, we will know right away if the scrap levels are going up. So if we see that the scrap levels are going up 10%, 20%, 30% by the hour, then we know something's wrong and we can act on it. So having access to real-time data is, to me, it's not even a choice. It's something that's required when you're working in a global environment.
Jeff, anything that you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, we did some research last year on this point, and really what is the business value of data? And the research showed back that, companies with more effective data, so the data quality, accessibility, usability, intelligence from that data, usually are growing 35% faster. So that research really shows that it's not just nice to have, to Mike's point, but really the access to the data is what fuels companies to grow in this day and age, whether they're working in one or two locations or they're working globally, as Mike is. I think the value of data is easy to underestimate, but generally a huge driver in business success.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about cloud. Again, as we mentioned at the beginning of the program, according to respondents of MBT's most recent survey on cloud, 40% are currently utilizing cloud technology or are in the process of implementing it. So out of those who are not using the cloud, approximately 27% of those companies are planning to move at least some services to the cloud in the next 1 to 3 years, according to our report. So in your opinion, Jeff and Mike, of course, as well, if you want to weigh in, are manufacturers leaders or laggards in this regard when compared to other industries? Do you know the answer to that?
Yeah, so Mike, I'll jump in first. Manufacturers tend to be laggards in this area, and not because manufacturers aren't responsive, but it's really just kind of a requirement of the business. Most manufacturing solutions are a little bit more complex, more integration points. And I was talking about the reasons to select cloud versus on-premise. Those integration points have been a little bit of a hindrance in adopting the cloud. Most manufacturing points, to Mike's, as Mike will attest, have multiple touch points, whether it's e-commerce or warehouse management or something else. Excuse me. And those touch points have slowed manufacturing down in adopting the cloud. That said, I think there's a lot of focus on the cloud for manufacturers now. Usually one of the top questions that we're trying to answer here, and we hear all the time, is when is the right time to move to a cloud solution? So it's manufacturing's been a little bit behind, but I think now it's cloud technology is front and center.
Mm-hmm.
And to Jeff's point, I have to agree with him. I think manufacturers would be a little bit slower than other markets to accept the cloud, simply because I think of the number of transactions and the rate of those transactions happening. For us, it was an easy decision because we can't put our stuff into the cloud because of the military regulations. There's too much classified information that we're just not allowed to keep outside the premises. So for us, it was an easy decision. But in retrospect, if we didn't have that type of requirement, I can very easily see going to a cloud solution, because if you think about all of our different locations worldwide, and I'm not just talking about our manufacturing plants, but also our distribution centers and our sales offices and everything else, we have a data center that we've spent quite a bit of money on making sure that it had all the security and all the redundancies and all the protections that it needs. Whereas if we had gone to a cloud-based solution, it's probably already going to be in a data center that has those type of things, and we could have saved quite a bit of money by having it hosted. And if one of our sites, if our data center goes down, our company goes down for the world. So we would have gotten rid of that problem had we gone to the cloud. But like I said, it really wasn't an option for us.
Mm-hmm. So, Mike, when it comes to technology, we hear more and more manufacturers discussing the relative merits of mobility, and you touched on this a little bit earlier when you were talking about some of the tools that you use at Avon, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about how Avon Rubber uses mobile access either outside of the office or on the shop floor. Can you go into a little bit more detail there?
Sure. We have a couple different types of mobility that inside the company. We obviously have a sales force that has full mobility using iPad apps and phones and things like that. But inside the floor, inside the plant itself, we do have those iPads that work wirelessly. So as people are walking around, they could easily bring up the application, or they could bring up the business intelligence tools, and they can move from point A to point B very seamlessly, and we're not having to worry about the old hardwired PLCs and computers that you had in the past. So from a mobility standpoint inside the company, it works very well. It just gives people the flexibility to move around and to even reconfigure some of the machines and some of the layouts of the plant. In the past, you always had to worry about moving the different data lines and the phone lines and everything else. Nowadays, if we want to shift the configuration of the plant, we just do it and everything connects wirelessly.
Jeff, anything else that we're missing there about mobility that you'd like to weigh in on? Anything interesting that is happening out there?
No, I think Mike really covered it really well. I think the interesting part, I think, is that Mike's using it in a piece of his business, but quite frankly, customers, the way they tell us how they're using the mobile technology on the shop floor or around the business is surprising us in how creative they are. So I think when it comes to mobility on the shop floor, the sky's kind of the limit, and our ability to be creative is really the only limit that we see.
Mm-hmm. Okay, one more question for me, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. So Sage's recent report said that 56% of respondents who deployed cloud-based ERP technology reported implementation cost savings of 41 to 60%. Jeff, maybe you could go into some more detail about where these savings lie. Is it really all about reducing infrastructure costs, or is there more to the story here?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's really divided into two areas. I'd say part of it's infrastructure, as you mentioned. Servers and backups and all that is basically handled for the business. And so there's a significant cost savings there. The other side is in time saved, both managing the systems and managing upgrades to the solution. So a lot of companies will have one or two IT or IS people that are focused on trying to keep all the systems moving and up and working efficiently. And by switching over to a cloud solution for their business management solution, you really free up a lot of time for the IT people to be driving value in other areas of the business and spending less time focusing on making sure that their ERP uptime is at their service level agreement, 99.9%, letting the cloud provider make sure that they're doing that. So it really is, part of it's that upfront investment and implementation, but part of it's the time savings of the vendor managing the upgrades and the systems as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Okay, well, let's move on to some of the questions that are coming in from the audience. And as I mentioned earlier, if you want to keep asking questions, feel free, even if we are nearing the end of the presentation, because the panelists have volunteered to address your questions offline if need be, so feel free to keep sending them in. So first off, I see a question here for Mike that has to do with business intelligence reporting. So we're wondering if you did all the business intelligence reporting in-house or if you had to utilize any outside parties like consultants to help you manage some of that data.
Well, we personally built everything in-house, but I think what you have to take into consideration is what type of staff you have. Do you have anybody that's really technical, or is it primarily just analysts? And then you have to also take into consideration the business intelligence tool you're using. We were lucky in that we had a number of good technical people who worked in the IT department who were able to extract the data out of the database very easily. And then we had the Sage Enterprise Intelligence tool, which is a very easy one to use. So after maybe a day or two of training from Sage, we just ran with it. We did everything ourselves, and there really was no other external costs from there.
Got it. Okay. This question is probably for Jeff. Typically, how is data migration handled from a legacy system to a new cloud ERP system? I think this is probably some people's biggest fear is that migration process. We hear that a lot. Maybe you could quell some fears here and talk about how that would work.
Yeah, that is a concern, and it's actually funny. It's pretty much the similar as moving to another on-premise solution. You pull the data out of the current system. It's always good if you could take some time to clean up the data. Get rid of junky data, get rid of any really old data you might have. And then instead of a vendor just uploading it into your own servers, the solution provider you're working with actually is just going to upload it into the cloud. Getting a little bit of how we do it, we actually have two layers in the cloud. We have a product layer, and then we have a data layer. So one server handles the product, and then a different server is handling the data. We actually keep all the data on like a single tenant instance. So the data is uploaded to your single tenant instance of the data. From there, it's just like it would be on-premise. It is not a scary process. It's handled pretty much like we would for an on-premise solution. But it's a good question because I think having it be out of your physical control is a concern for companies.
Mm-hmm. So Mike, you had mentioned an iPad application. Can you talk a little bit more about the development of this? We've been talking a lot about mobility, and I think people are probably interested in some of that homegrown type stuff and what you guys have been doing over there at Avon.
Well, what we did was we looked at the architecture that was built into Sage X3, and one of the things that they had, which was very helpful for us, is web services. It allowed us to do different calls from other external applications and get data directly into X3 and still run it through all the business rules and all the requirements that the system has. So by leveraging web services, all we built was a very simplistic web page using .NET. And by creating it through the web page, we're able to do those web service calls and get the data in so that we had a very simple interface, and people put a couple of things in using the iPad, and then when they hit that button to submit that transaction, it's calling all the standard Sage validation rules and business rules that you would get if you do the application itself. So the development and the architecture itself made our lives so much easier.
Mm-hmm. Okay. This question is for Jeff. What are some of the more creative applications of the cloud that you have seen in business management? I know it's kind of a big question, but if you have any thoughts on that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, that is a big question. I'd almost like to have an hour of with a panel to cover that because we can't even see it all. But I think the most creative that we're seeing are combining cloud solutions with tablets, oftentimes with like a kind of a rugged case, and using them on the shop floor in ways that we wouldn't have thought. I mean, some of the more common usages that we would expect would be for recipe management for a food manufacturer or something like that, and giving users really easy access to move through the recipe. But also on floors, we're seeing people using the cameras for phones as scanners, or phones or tablets as scanners. Certainly at a different pace than you would for a handheld scanner like Mike's talking to, but really utilizing the camera functionality and the mobile tech to move all around the floor, manage. I can't even think of all the examples we've seen, but manage time clocks and employee break time and movement of goods around the floor and just again that creative is. I'd really like to do a panel on that. There's so many creative solutions, but we see that a lot. Time management, employee management, movement of goods, formula management tend to be the most interesting ones we see. But I'm sure some of our customers can give us even more interesting examples than that.
Mm-hmm. That seems to be getting more and more nuanced every day, doesn't it?
Yeah, it definitely does.
So, Jeff, we have another question from the audience, and hopefully this isn't too specific, but they're wondering how many companies in the U.S. are using cloud as a flexible technology tool. And we kind of covered this before, so you have any insight on this? Yeah,
so I think it kind of depends on how you look at it and really how you define a flexible technology tool. In some ways, you could say almost 100% of companies are using the cloud. When you look at, Microsoft has moved a lot of their Outlook servers to the cloud. If you're using like Outlook 365 now or Office 365, a lot of that's delivered in the cloud. Gmail's obviously cloud, so a lot of emails in the cloud, but I think a lot of people don't consider that kind of the core functionality. It's easy to ignore some of those. And so a lot of the data we see is about 40% of companies are using the cloud in terms of more of the business management solutions. And that's not necessarily for just ERP, but for a piece of their business management, whether it's sales. We do see a lot of salespeople armed with using the cloud and mobile devices to stop printing catalogs. I think used to see that all the time, right? But now salespeople are using devices with the catalog on the device. Catalogs, once they were printed, were outdated. But in this day and age, it's easy to update a device and include customer-specific pricing, credit terms, actual inventory counts. So that's just, I think, one example of how companies, that 40% of companies are using it, and it does seem to be about 40% when you look at it again as kind of business specific, but again, for most companies it's closer to 100% when you look at everything the business is using. So I kind of gave two answers that. I think it's just two different perspectives on how you want to define the question.
No, I think that was helpful. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So we have a couple questions that are kind of looking for specific data points. So I'm going to have the folks on the panel answer those offline, so maybe do a little research if they need to. But as we get to the end of our discussion here, I just wanted to thank our panel, Jeff and Mike, for all the great information today, and then as well our sponsor, Sage. Just a reminder that this will be sent to you tomorrow on demand, so you can view it again. You can share it. The Sage report you referenced will be coming as well. Jeff, I wanted to give you an opportunity to say something on behalf of Sage if you'd like before we go.
Oh, be happy to. Well, first of all, thanks for having us. I really appreciate getting the opportunity to talk to a group of people looking at solutions. We have cloud and on-premise solutions. Don't want to turn it into a commercial, but the reason we're so comfortable sharing the benefits of each capability or each deployment option is we have solutions in both, and so we don't shy away from one or the other. We really are here to help the folks we're talking to through us and our partners get the right solution for them. So if you are interested, please don't hesitate to give us a call.
Okay. Well, thank you so much again, Mike and Jeff, for the great presentation, and to the audience for attending today. Thank you so much, and have a great afternoon.
Great.